So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our fourth and final webinar about assessment feedback. We had a great description of our session this week shared out on our PD site, and we're going to try to live up to it. You'll see us as three Yodas on the main screen here. So my name is Kelly Bokoschuk, Superintendent of Learning with SunWest, and with me this morning I have Melissa Lander and Vanessa Lewis, our learning consultants, and we are thrilled to have you back and continue down this journey regarding assessment feedback with us. So as you can see, we have finished the first three feedback sessions. We talked about the 1 in 4 rule, student reflection and assessment, how to use technology tools strategically, looking at some peer feedback and assessment ideas, recognizing what busy work is, and having students be able to show their best work. Today, our focus is on distance learning and thinking about the situation that we're in right now and how we can incorporate formative and summative assessment within our online supplemental learning, but also thinking about the true nature of formative and summative assessment. So just wanted to share out that our past sessions have been posted and think further about assessment feedback.
Okay, so just a quick recap of what we've done so far in the past 3 episodes. So we've looked at tip 1, which is follow the 1 in 4 rule. So instead of marking every single thing your students do, picking about 1 in 4 thing and marking the other to actually look at and give feedback to, and marking the other 3 as complete. Tip 2 being having the students self-assess. That builds great assessment capable learners. It also provides them with the ability to build that honesty, and their ability to succeed will improve because they're going to understand more what success actually looks like. The next thing we talked about, some of those amazing tech tools that you can use that will not only mark for you, but also give the students feedback on the fly. So there's lots of great things we explored there in episode 2. And in episode 2, we also looked at tip 4, where we're trying some peer feedback, and we looked at some interesting ways to incorporate peer feedback into the loop to try to alleviate some of the pressure on the teacher, but also to provide the kids with that ability to become assessment capable learners. And we also looked at recognizing busy work, and that you don't necessarily have to provide feedback for the busy work. That's just often working towards more of a mastery type of thing. And the last tip that we looked at, which is similar to the 1 in 4 rule, except instead of you selecting the work that the students are going to show you and get some more deep feedback from you, you're going to allow the students to choose that so that they're showing their best work. And again, that helps build those assessment capable learners.
So as educators, we know there's many different types of assessments, including, flip to the next slide, our readiness or diagnostic assessments, formative assessments, and summative assessments. And we'll briefly explore these throughout the webinar, and then we will hear from a number of our own teachers as to how they are utilizing them in support of student learning and achievement. So I'll begin with readiness or diagnostic assessments. These types of assessments are helpful in determining where students are at prior to learning, as they may provide some insight into where students are in terms of their academics or their skills or even their attitudes towards learning. And in SunWest, we have placed a lot of emphasis on really getting to know our learners through their unique learner profiles, their baseline in relation to things like the 21st century competencies, and their attitude in relation to growth mindset. We also strive to make great efforts to consider where students are at in relation to subject-specific skills, and the reading, writing, math is prime examples of some of those tools, diagnostic tools, or things that we use to help figure out where our students are before the learning takes place. Students in our classroom are not all at the same level. We do know that. They may not all possess the same prerequisite skills for a course or a unit. And this type of assessment can be used to help identify individual strengths, their weaknesses, their knowledge, their skills, and any gaps prior to instruction, which we can then look at in terms of planning learning experiences in support of student growth. So we have to consider what this might look like in a distance learning environment. And really, the diagnostic or readiness type assessments look very similar as they do face-to-face classroom environment. We just need to maybe take a little bit of time to explore tech tools and determine what will best support ourselves and our learners. And so just some examples here. And there's a lot more, and you will hear from teachers later as well, but learner profiles can easily be shared using different types of tech tools. OneNote has been used in our division a lot for students to showcase their learner profile and preserve them. And online tools, I know a number of us used Learner Sketch this year, and as did some students. And it really is a great tool because it's all online. Students are worked through a number of prompts to answer various questions. Then the online tool itself provides the learner with a personalized profile. The results can be used by them as well as ourselves as teachers to inform how they learn, things like most suitable learning environments, give them ideas as to what learning strategies might support them, and really helps students to take ownership of their own learning. The results from online tools like this one can also be downloaded and like shared and uploaded or whatnot in other platforms such as OneNote or even different e-portfolio tools. And there's so many opportunities for that. Teachers can also create different types of diagnostic assessments using tech tools. A couple mentioned here, Poly or perhaps Forms, or can even create some before learning type quizzes or games on platforms like Kahoot or Jeopardy or maybe even Quizlet to determine where students are at prior to instruction. So one that we've been highlighting over the whole assessment series, I would say, because it's really a strong tool, is something like the online mathletics. It's really a great example of a diagnostic assessment, as there's built in like common assessments throughout, as well as like overarching assessments, which can help identify outcomes kids have mastered and what they still need. And then in that Are You Ready section, there's tools to help support students with their building of the particular skills and outcomes. So there's a lot of options for us, and just might have to take some time to investigate what would look best in terms of a distance learning environment. And also, Kelly, Melissa, and I were chatting a little bit prior to this about that cupcake activity, which some of you might remember from the beginning of the school year. It was an activity we engaged in with Pebble mentors and a few other audiences as we challenged each other to think about the transition to our new 4-point achievement scale. And so we were all trying to think of something we could easily connect with, in this case, like baking a cupcake. And 3 might mean that it's finished and it's done baking, which would indicate certainly that we understand the outcome. But to go beyond, maybe we're going to decorate it or fancy it up a little bit to move towards a 4. Or maybe we didn't really know what a cupcake was to begin with, and we tossed all the cupcake mix we prepared into a loaf pan and didn't even really get to the baking stage or something along that lines. And we were just beginning and only had a basic or initial understanding of the concept. And all are very realistic, all are very much okay. It's just important to know where students are at in terms of their readiness for learning. And these types of tools can help support that and then help us build learning experiences for our students.
So when we think about formative assessment, this is something that is not new. And we think about it in terms of assessment for learning, where the teacher is looking at the different learnings that the students are doing and their activities, and thinking about how they can provide some feedback to students to move towards achieving their goals. And assessment as learning, where the student is being taking the lead and looking at their learning. So formative assessment really refers to the ongoing process students and teachers engage in when they focus on their learning goals, when they take stock of where current work is in relation to their learning goals, as well as take actions to move closer to their own learning goals. But one thing to remember is that formative assessment is not used for grading. Students need and they actually deserve an opportunity to learn before they're graded on how well they have learned. So formative assessment is used during instruction to find out how they are progressing. In addition, research on the use of formative assessment has shown that when teachers practice good formative assessment and students participate in it, both achievement and motivation increase. So those are key pieces when we talk about in terms of distance learning. There's a variety of different tools that we can use for formative assessment, and we've identified a few here. Everything from polls, so using that in teams, and if you've been in our previous episodes, we've used polls quite a bit. Reflection is always a great way to look at gathering formative assessment data, using tools like Flipgrid or emails or memes, even having students write songs. Great ways to find out where they're at with their learning. Definitely interactive activities where things like Nearpod, again, you can use Kahoot. A lot of the tools we're talking about you can use for a variety of different feedback, gathering of feedback. And there are tools also that provide built-in feedback opportunities. Vanessa talked about Mathletics. Also Khan Academy, you get immediate feedback, and then also encourage you to access some of the DLC open access courses where they have built-in feedback tools that you can access through their courses. Again, talking about portfolios and Seesaw, we can look at that formative assessment piece there where students are submitting their items. So maybe that's part of that 1 in 4 to show some of their work there. Again, and then talking about small group learning and discussions. So having some meetings and lessons to inform instruction is key. So even just having conversations, that gives the students the opportunity to be part of their own assessment and feedback, and you really get a lot of insight from them.
Okay, and moving along to summative assessment. This is more traditionally what we have been thinking of as assessment, where we're taking the product and we are assessing the quantitative and putting a value on that product. So we're assessing the actual learning at this point. So this is a gathering of information to make that judgment. It shouldn't just be from a single piece. It should be tied very closely to that success criteria that is shared at the beginning, and we'll look a little bit more closely at that later in the webinar. But again, no surprises here, and the idea with summative is the students should have a really good idea of where they're performing even before the teacher places value on it. So in distance ed, this can look a little bit different, but as always, variety is really the spice of life. So you want to give lots of different options. And with distance learning, there are tons of different options, as well as in the classroom. These all can be used in the classroom as well. So in the resource bank, there is a, I think we're going to have it popped into the chat, but there are product choices for PBL, but they can be used for anything as well. And there's a link to that that's available in the resource bank, and also ways to share your learning. So lots and lots of different choices for students. And we want to avoid that middle year's death by PowerPoint. So we really want to stretch the kids and get them to try a bunch of different ways. So you don't have to know how to necessarily use all these things. You can let the students figure it out, and they can then become the expert in your class and train the others that are interested in it. Genially is probably my new favorite one this year that I kind of took on and decided to learn, and I made some amazing graphics in there and some interactives too. So lots of things that would link out to other things, sort of in a Prezi kind of style. It's quite a cool tool. The other thing that we want to consider with this is that we want to provide feedback along the way prior to submission. You shouldn't just be getting something handed into you that you've never looked at or somebody else has not looked at and given the student feedback to improve. This is kind of the end of the road, hopefully, unless we have to go back into the formative loop if there's a lack of understanding. But you want the students feeling really confident at this point and that they know that they've got it, they're done, and that they've had some great feedback along the way. And it's a great idea to build in that reflection as part of the summative assessment, and even having the student evaluate themselves and possibly their peers.
So when students engage in gathering information about their learning and through the use of self and peer assessments and check in towards their learning goals, they are participating in assessment as learning, as has already been shared. Assessment for learning is when teachers gather information about student learning from a variety of sources, might be observations or maybe conversations or products, to determine how well a student is achieving the curricular outcome. So the same formative assessment can be used for both for and as learning. Summative assessment, which Melissa just described, usually occurs towards the end of a unit or course, and the teacher's making some judgments about the learning based on the outcome and the achievement scale. However, assessment of learning can be used for this evaluation purpose, or it can loop back into assessment as or for learning if the student needs more support. So, for example, if a summative assessment of some sort has been completed, but it's determined that the student needs more time or maybe further support in order to master the outcome, in essence, that summative assessment then has just become more formative in nature, and that's totally okay. And on the flip side of that, formative assessment can sometimes become summative assessment if a student has clearly demonstrated an outcome. Just a possible example of that is if a student might be behind in a math unit and the teacher has been providing some individualized supports for instruction to help that student. Maybe the student is submitting evidence of learning in the form of, I don't know, maybe some exit slips or something to that effect over the course of a few days and is able to demonstrate mastery of that skill, then perhaps at that point, the formative assessment could be considered summative and the student might be able to then move on without having completed the planned summative assessment for that particular outcome or unit or whatever the case may be. So I hope I'm not confusing things too much. I think the key takeaway here is just that professional judgment and flexibility are key in all of this in terms of assessment, and also in relation to the distance piece, flexibility is key because a lot of the tools that we've mentioned can be used for different types of assessment.
So there's a number of pieces of information that students need to hold or begin developing in order to be considered assessment capable learners. So they need to know what they already know. They need to know the skills that they already have that are going to help them achieve their goal. But they also need to know what is the goal, what is the learning outcome that they're actually working on. And then how do they know that they've met that goal? And that's a lot of times going to require a conversation. It's a little bit abstract sometimes to know. And then you're going to talk a little bit about how, how that they will know that they met it. That would be looking at some of those success criteria that hopefully you'll develop together or provide very clearly examples and non-examples for the student. And then they need to know what tools they have to get there. So what do I need to know how to use, and what do I already have that I know how to use that's going to help me achieve this goal? And then they need to know how to monitor their learning and use that feedback, not just look at it. As I'm always saying, they have to take it and use it to improve their work along the way. And that's something that often requires a lot of modeling. I know, reading stories and essays, and we write tons of feedback, and then you get your second draft back in or your final draft back in without any of the changes. So sometimes some group lessons on how to actually do that, where you're modeling it for the students and you're doing it together as a group, can really help that click. That can be really difficult for students. And then again, knowing how they're going to actually be evaluated and what criteria is being used. So when we look at this little area here, these are really those readiness and diagnostic things. They need to kind of know, are they ready? What do I already know? How can I do this? And when we look at these ones up in the top right, we're really looking at that formative loop there. These are my tools. How do I know I'm going to monitor my success? And then when we're looking down here, we're looking at our summative. And then up in that top corner is that setting of the success for the summative. So we don't want to miss that top left side. Really, really important, because the kids need to know how they're going to be assessed, what success looks like, and how they're going to know when they get there. So you can see here that this is where it's really important to make sure that the students are involved in this process. They can't be passive when we're looking at all of the different steps. They are involved in all of them. Which leads to just a quick reminder about the assessment process. Again, we looked at this in more depth in our episode 1, but you can see here when you look at the assessment process, the students are part of every single step. So we want them to become involved. We want them to become assessment capable. It's going to improve their overall success and their ability just to be successful, not only in assessment, but in pretty much anything they can take and break down and do. So we want, again, to make sure that they know what the learning outcome is and what they know exactly how they're going to know that they've met it. We'll hopefully involve them in developing that success criteria or providing it very explicitly and clearly. We're going to look at their readiness assessments and what do they actually need to do their learning, and what do they have and what do they need to get. And then we'll enter into that lovely formative loop where we're doing that dance back and forth between the learning and setting goals and working towards our final product of summative and meeting the outcome. So again, at this point, sometimes kids might have to pop back into that formative loop if they don't quite have it, and they might get there quite quickly and be able to go on and extend their learning. It's all flexible, as Vanessa was talking about earlier.
So our hope is to develop assessment capable, visible learners, and we've been working really hard over the last many years in SunWest to support this. And of note, we have referenced and utilized ideas from the resources by experts Nancy Fry, John Hattie, and Douglas Fisher along the way. You can kind of see the image of that resource on the right-hand side of your screen there. Essentially, assessment capable, visible learners are learners who can self-regulate or self-manage, seek challenge, set their own goals, learn from their mistakes, ask for help when needed, and be able to teach themselves as well. I'm just waiting for the slide to flip. They can identify a learning outcome and explain what they are working on and why, share learning strategies, identify next steps in their learning journey, seek and use feedback effectively, support the learning of others, and engage in metacognition by talking about their own learning. I'm not sure if the slide is flipping there.
All right, so for students to be effectively involved in their learning, whether it's at the I do, we do, or you do stage, they need to know themselves as people or learners. They need to have a toolkit of skills and know how to be involved or lead their learning to be successful. So each of these elements requires explicit teaching, or an I do, experience, and a we do situation, and ultimately the opportunity to take their lead in their own learning processes, which is the you do. So to best showcase how to involve students in their learning, we've asked SunWest teachers for tips that they can use to involve students in their own learning. So with that, I'm going to invite, first of all, Shauna George, picture on the left, who is Pebble Mentor and grade 3-4 teacher at Loreburn School, to share some of the tips that she's got with regards to the first piece with regards to learner profiles.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, ladies, for having me back again. So I started looking at learner profiles in my elementary classroom and how it's kind of evolved over the last 4 years. I asked myself two big questions. Why is it important for the students to understand how they learn best and what they need to be successful? Like Melissa's been saying, the kids need to know where they are and how they need to get to where they're going. And then how do I take this knowledge and apply it to my teaching and planning for individual kids? Okay. So these were our first attempts at learner profiles 4 years ago. We had Epiphany, and there was a bunch of quizzes that we had access to. at the time, and now they're listed in the resource bank, quite a few of them. This was my poster originally. Can we just go back one? I don't know. I'm playing with my mouse here. But with Epiphany, my littles really struggled with this, just for the fact that there was not an iPad app that went with it, and their little fingers on computer keyboards weren't very efficient, and a lot of the language was really difficult for my kids. So we actually at the time paired up with some of the middle years kids, and they were able to read the questions to my littles and help them answer the questions onto Epiphany to get that uploaded. And then of course the learner profile posters that we did with the personality quizzes, I kind of picked and chose what my kids would do just because some of the language was so big. The words like kinesthetic and linguistical and empathetic that came from some of those quizzes was way too big for my littles, but they did lead to really good conversations about what those things meant. And it was very much like unpacking outcomes. We unpacked those vocabulary words and what it meant to be kinesthetic and what it meant to be a linguistical learner, and changed those into, oh yeah, I learn best by listening, or I learn best by building things. So it was a really good conversation starter from them. So then if we go on to the next slide, this was just some easier things that I did to start the year off. The ones on the left were just posters that I had bought at Teacher's Trunk, but I liked the content that they were there because the theme in my classroom at the time was superheroes, and why are we individually superheroes? What do we do great as learners? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? What do I love to do? What are my main goals? And then the one on the right, I actually did that as a cross-curricular assignment with social studies because I wanted to link it to First Nations content. When we first did the learner profiles, one of the online quizzes was about what was your animal? And I was a swallow. Well, for some of the animals that the kids didn't connect to them as much as I wanted them to. So we used the First Nations content for the kids to more choose of the animal that they thought best represented themselves. And you can't see it, it actually got cut off, but at the bottom of their pictures, for instance, Jasper said he was a turtle, and he had to say at the bottom why he was a turtle and what that meant to him. Well, and he told us that, well, he had a tough outer shell, but in the inside he was a big softie. And that meant that he needed support, even though sometimes he didn't feel like he showed that he needed it. So it was interesting, the conversations that the kids came up with and what they knew that they needed. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Oh, sorry. And then this year, we actually asked the parents what they thought about their own kids and the way they learn best. So in November, Jill Long, our principal, sent this questionnaire out to the parents and asked them some very specific things about how they would describe their student, how does their child learn best, and what their successes were and what they could strengthen. Was really interesting because our viewpoints were very much in line with the parents. What we saw as teachers, parents really saw at home, and we're actually very interested in sending this questionnaire out again after COVID is done to see how the parents interpret how their student learns best now that they've been at home and have been their number one support in their learning at home, to see if things have changed and if maybe they need to support their child in a different way. This year also, I created a seesaw activity myself. This was my first crack at seesaw, or creating my own seesaw activity, so it was interesting. But I just wanted to make it more simple for the kids, something they could do in the iPad and add to their learner profiles. So basically same thing. I let them choose an animal that they thought best represented themselves and ways to describe it. Tell me their superpowers and what their kryptonite was and what they wanted our learning environment to look like and what was best for them. So I took that information and tried to design my classroom around that and give them some flexibility in their learning as to, if they needed that quiet. If there wasn't quiet in my classroom, maybe they had to go to the boot room to get that, or if they needed to listen to some music to drown out the noise, that's what they needed. Or if they needed to sit beside me the whole class just to make sure that they got their work done, that happened too. And then 2 of our grade 8 girls this year created this template to amalgamate our learner profiles with our Leader in Me goals and mission statements at LCS. So Lorburn is a Leader in Me school. So every year we ask the kids to create a personal mission statement, and then they are supposed to have 2 wigs. Some of my littles only have 1, but you're supposed to have an academic wig, which you want to work on at school, and then a personal wig that's important to you. So from that, then we had the kids try and figure out how they were going to meet their wigs using their strengths and their weaknesses, what they find difficult, and how they learn best. So to amalgamate the concepts that we teach them with the Leader in Me as well as their learner profiles. So last week then, when I decided that I was going to introduce these learner profiles and how it works in my classroom, I actually asked the kids in my calls with them this week to reflect on their learner profiles at school before COVID hit, and then what it's like learning at home. So these are some of their comments. Some of the kids said, well, at school we did a lot of rotations with our daily 3 and our Pebble math rotations, but at home we work on one thing until it's complete. If we start a spelling lesson, we finish it. Or if we start a math lesson, we finish it. We don't get halfway through and then move on to mathletics. They said, at school we do work a lot in groups and partners. At home, it's all by myself. Both at home and at school, we're very much the same. Parents are trying to create that quiet atmosphere to work in, just like we do at school. Most of the kids really missed the classroom discussions. That was their big thing. They missed that socializing. They missed discussing different concepts together. And they do get a little of that with me in their meetings, but that's what they missed the most. Also at school, they said they love the hands-on drawing, creating, building, that they don't get to do so much at home that's based on that bookwork that I've sent. So they missed that. Socializing too, they've become very ingenious with ways to connect to the outside. They're working, playing games online with friends. They're using teams between each other to play different games and meet virtually just to even read a book together. And then this last one was just my reflection myself. My learner profile at school, I would have said, I work best when I am standing, moving around the classroom, kneeling beside kids. But I crave that quiet time at school because there's always students and staff around. And you don't have that flexibility that you might at home because there's a fixed schedule. But now that I'm at home myself, I've self-evaluated, and now we've got all this extra computer time. And instead of me craving to stand or to sit at a desk, now I'm craving to stand. So I brought a standing desk home, and I have to make sure that, I take exercise breaks to stay healthy. And, that gave me the connection of my kids at school. We need those body breaks. We need those brain breaks just to get ourselves back and motivated. And then that positivity. We need to remember we need fresh air and sunshine, and we need to connect with others to stay positive and to check in to make sure others are staying positive. So again, that's something for the classroom, that continual check-in. How are you doing? What do you need? How can I help? How can I support? What do we need to change? So really good reflections across the board for kids and myself of how has our learning changed, and does this put a new lens on what we thought we needed before? So how will I use this information and planning for my classroom and assignments? Some of the good old Pebble philosophies, right? Giving them that pace and place of product. And now thinking about more of the materials and the supports when the kids said they don't have that access to materials at home, you know, those manipulatives and math, and maybe even just things to create 3D objects and stuff that they don't get at home. Use those best practices that we're talking about. What's the best way to get them where they're going? This one was a huge one, the third one for me, giving them the opportunity to work through an assignment to completion instead of rotating to the next activity. So I really will apply that in my class when we do go back, because I realize for myself, I like to finish things to completion. I don't want to do something halfway and then say, oh, we're going to go on to the next thing, rotation, and we'll pick that up tomorrow. So that's something I really want to work into my classroom, to give the kids that choice. If they want to switch, they can, but if they don't, give them that more of that flexibility. Again, same old, those pebble thoughts. Do I need quiet working areas? Is there more group work those kids are just craving now? But I've also now realized, you know what? Most of them can have more responsibility for their learning. They're not as little as sometimes I think they are. They're way more capable than they are. And on the other hand, we have a few students at home and their parents that I've realized need more support, that they aren't as responsible for their learning, and I need to check in with them more. And that adage that's come through for all three of the last 3 webinars, that work smarter, not harder. You know, I got to do that every day. Work smarter, not harder. So I hope that helps a little bit. That's just a little into my world and my mindset.
Shauna, thank you so very much. There are so many things that I picked up on throughout your presentation that are key pieces. I'm going to just identify a couple because I know we want to move on, but the reflection piece, how important that is for you to be reflecting on your own practice, talking to the students about reflecting on their own learning and how they're learning, and also the changes that have come with working from home and what that looks like, and how you're going to change your practice. Also, the key piece for me was, another key piece was walking alongside with parents, knowing that their input in how they see their own children and how they learn best and their personalities is key. And it helps them understand what we talk about in schools. So many great pieces, and thank you so very much for sharing. So with that, we're going to move on to Jacqueline Moore and Kent Carlson from RCHS. They're both the Pebble mentors there, as well as teaching a variety of other subject areas. So welcome, Jacqueline and Kent.
Thank you.
Hi.
So yeah, as Kelly alluded to, we are both Pebble mentors at the same school. We share the role. We're at Rosetown Central High School, and our school is a little bit different in that we don't really have homeroom teachers. So once they get to grade 7, they come to the high school, and our middle year students specifically, they'll have anywhere from 11 up to 11 different classes with like 8 to 10 different teachers, depending on the school year and who's teaching what. But so we kind of had to come up with some different ways to make the learner profiles work for us. So we'll talk about a few different things. Which teacher is going to be responsible for constructing the learner profiles? How are we going to display them? And how do we get some of the data from the learner profiles to the teachers? And then which aspects of the learner profiles do we want to focus on? Because we found that it was tricky to incorporate all those different things when kids are moving to so many different classrooms. So over the past few years, we've evolved our learner profiles to a point where we think that they're useful for our teachers and useful for our students. We'll go to thank you. So the actual making of the learner profiles, 2 years ago we tried, and I didn't really have a good template for the students to use. I had a bunch of tests that I wanted them to do, but then I kind of said, well, let's just throw them onto a Word document, and we'll give you some flexibility on what it looks like in the end. And then I kind of found that was not so good, because then the learner profiles looked quite a bit different from each other and we're missing some pieces because kids didn't know where to put things. So what we did was we said, well, we have a computers class in grade 7, 8, 9, and I happen to teach that class. So let's have them make it in that class. I gave them a template, exactly what it looks like on the screen there. And it made it easier for staff to look at them afterwards as well. So like if the staff was trying to find the self-regulation score for the kid, then they knew exactly where to look on everybody's learner profile instead of having to look in multiple spots, or some of the learner profiles before ended up being on 2 or 3 pages, and it became quite hard to look at. So we make them in with me as their teacher instead of them making it with a bunch of different teachers. There are pros and cons to that. One of the pros is that they look similar and they're easy to see the data, but one of the cons is that not every teacher owns the learner profiles as much as me. And I think Jacqueline can speak to that a little bit.
So we had to determine how we were going to display our learner profiles and have all of our teachers be able to access them. So it didn't really make sense for us to try to display them in each class because lots of our teachers have over 100 students. So we decided that we would print them off and get them into each student's binder so that then they're kind of walking with them to each class, so that during your class period you would have access to those learner profiles.
Yeah, and along with that, we also had we had all the learner profiles. The first year we tried putting them all in OneNote, and it worked okay, but it was kind of tedious to see everyone's learner profile. There was a lot of clicks to get to them. So then what we did was we put them on our public drive so that staff could see them and students could see everybody else's as well that way. This slide here is about how we've taken all the data from the learner profiles and put it into a spreadsheet, and then we can share that spreadsheet with all of our staff so they can kind of see the makeup of their class and how that looks. So between Jacqueline and myself, it was a lot of data input initially, but from year to year, it doesn't end up taking too long once you have your sheet set up. And our teachers have given us lots of good feedback on that. They really like being able to see the makeup of their class and even just the individual students as well.
And easily being able to manipulate the data.
Yep.
If you want to organize by grit score, if you want to organize by self-regulation score, you can easily do that for each one of your classes.
Yeah, or color or learning style. It kind of makes it easier if you're going to do some group work. You can organize really easily by those and make sure you can. So let's say for some reason, if you wanted to have group them by color, so you have the same colors, or if you wanted to have them to ensure that there's a different color in each group, that it made it easier to organize their data as well. So we've decided as our school, we're going to be focusing on self-regulation and grit. Grit we started focusing on last year, and then self-regulation we made a rubric that kind of fit our school, and we started doing it last year a little bit, and once school stopped, then it became a little bit more tricky to do, but we've refined our rubric a little bit, and this is a common rubric that every student in our school will be going through. And then we also have our teachers are going to be going through that rubric and kind of giving their students a score as well.
So again, with grit, we have each one of our students fill out their grit score, and it goes on to the learner profile. All of our teachers assessed every student as well and gave them a grit score. And then we had a grit award where students that showed a high amount of grit in all of their classes, they received a card and got recognized. That kind of got halted with COVID, and we're looking at ways we can still highlight the students that have been working hard over the these past few months.
Yeah, and the data, like we were saying, it's been informing us a little bit. There's even some things that we don't think about, like when you see a kid self-assessing themselves on their grit or their self-regulation. Sometimes we've seen that the kids will be giving themselves a 4 for this, and then the teachers on average are giving them like a 2. So it informs a little bit of a conversation that we can have with those kids, and maybe have them go through the rubric again and see, what maybe they're like, what are their teachers seeing that they aren't. So it just helps us with that. And then the Grit Recognition Award, we're also, part of that is we've got kids who are like almost there. So we kind of tentatively we've set our number at like 3.5. So if a student is getting a 3.5 or above from their teachers, from all of their teachers on average, we're going to recognize that. But then if they're close to it, we don't know what the close is yet, but if they're close to it, we're also going to be assigning mentors to those students to help them figure out, well, what are some things that as a teacher I see that you could work on. So is it that you need to choose a more challenging option when you're given the chance, and that would kind of put you over the top? Or is it, being able to be open to feedback? And, is that the thing that's going to put you over the top? So that's part of it too, is mentoring these students and getting them to a higher level of grit and self-regulation as well.
Okay, so students need to become aware of the tools in their toolbox and how and when to use them. So for example, students need to be able to understand the learning outcome, which may involve unpacking it or breaking it down into student-friendly language before they're going to be able to achieve it. And students also need to set goals in relation to achieving the outcome. They need to be familiar with how to build a rubric, possibly even starting by reviewing teacher-made rubrics and moving into co-creating rubrics, or even eventually having students create their own. We all know that's certainly an investment of time and can be, though, very well worth it. Students also have to understand their success criteria and be able to see what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. And finally, whether it be tools to support goal setting, planning, strategies, technology, 21st century skills, or the like, students really require a solid understanding of the tools they already have, as well as the ones they still need. So today, I just didn't mean to jump so fast into this slide, Kent and Jacqueline. You guys did an awesome job of sharing your information, and I had popped something into the chat, and then looking at the time, I kept rolling without pausing. So I'm just going to pause for a minute, and we will just sort of debrief your talk there. Kelly, would you like to start that?
Yeah, I just added a bit in the chat there. Thank you so much, Kent and Jacqueline. It's so nice to see the difference between what Shauna talked about in more of the elementary and the growth in the learning and the opportunities in high school, and the rich conversations you can have and using data to inform. Great to hear about the evolution of your process and to hear about next steps. So, nice to hear about the challenges and the successes, and knowing that you're reflecting on those processes and the integration. So thank you again so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks. Again, I apologize, you two. I didn't mean to do that. And also today, we're going to have one of our amazing teachers talk about some tips in relation to helping students know their own tools and how to support them. So I'll pass it back to Kelly again to introduce her.
So the next teacher we have sharing this morning is Leanne Heath, and she is a teacher and Pebble mentor at Lucky Lake School. And so welcome, Leanne. We look forward to hearing what you are going to share with us this morning.
Okay, so first I want to talk about setting goals. And when we first were told we should be setting goals with the kids or whatever, I thought, oh, this is a great idea. So I went into my classroom and I shared a goal of mine with them and just got these blank looks back at me like, well, that wouldn't be my goal. Like, the kids weren't thinking the same way as I was thinking. So then I said, okay, let's start by making a math goal. And I still got some blank, like nobody wanted to share what they wanted. So I thought, oh, well, if you didn't know your math facts, would that be a good goal? Like, you know, to tell the kids. And then I got back, everyone had that. Even if they knew their math facts, they all picked that as their goal. So I thought, well, this isn't working. So general goals weren't working for me. So then I made this little booklet. So this is the one that I used for this school year. And so we picked a SMART goal for organization. So they make their basic statement, and then they pick a date to do it by. But then they weren't very specific. So we went down and I put the actions that I will take to complete this goal. So they have to choose 3 things that they're going to accomplish in order to help them accomplish their goal. And so we did that for quite a few different things. So this is just writing SMART goals with students. Worked out better when they had to have 3 things, because if it wasn't really, like, lots of the kids were choosing things that they were already good at. So that was like, you know, what could they do to complete it? Well, they were already good at those things. So then we could have a conversation about that goal really maybe not being the best goal for you if they didn't have enough actions that we both thought were really proper for them. So it all has to do with having good conversations with students about their goals too. And I also found that one thing, you can't have them write too many goals in one day, because they just burn out. They can't do it. So we only wrote 1 goal each day for the first little while in school. And we wouldn't hit it every day, but I wanted them, and that was their homework for the day, is to think about something they wanted for their goal. And then I also let them choose a goal of their choice. So I had one about organization, math, reading, writing, but then they could choose a goal that was just important to them, that they wanted to work on that school year. And yeah, so that's how I do goal setting. And then this is a listening skills checklist. So I had some kids who, well, listening was really a challenge. And so instead of doing it just for those kids, I did it with the whole class. And so say we had a speaker in or whatever, after a speaker, we would, you know, hand these out, and they were just smiley faces that the kids circled. And it was interesting to see the kids that I knew were not listening, how they rated themselves. And then we could have a conversation about that too. And we could, you know, talk about that. And sometimes I use it with just a set group of kids or a kid. In private, we do it. And sometimes I do it with the whole class, because sometimes the weak ones think that they rock at it, and sometimes the strong ones think that they suck at it. And so then we can have a conversation about that, and usually come to the realization that we do both agree. It's just that they just didn't want to admit that they were weak. And then in parent-teacher conferences, I also go back to setting goals. We do this before the parents come, and then we go over it at the parent-teacher conference, which is a really good time to sit down with kids and go over their work habits, their organization skills. And I've used a bunch of different ones, but this one is my favorite. And it's not one that I made. I think that it has a copyright thing at the bottom. And so it's just a good thing that goes over kind of, and it has some goal setting in it and their work habits. And then we go over it with their parents, and it's a good conversation starter about lots of different things that you want to talk about that student, with that student and their parents. And what I don't have a piece of paper for, but another thing that I have done is building rubrics together. And I have had successes where kids automatically link to the skills that I taught, and they're like, these should be on the rubric. And then I have had disasters where a group of kids just don't make any of the connections. They want it to be marked on their art skills when it's about writing, or they want it to be marked on, you know. So I think that that's all normal, and So if you're trying it and you do have a disaster, keep trying, because a different topic or a different group of students you will have success. So keep trying. And that's all I have to share.
Thank you, Leanne. So many great tips. There's so many connections between your goal setting book and the learner profiles, and knowing who you are, and all of the questions and the scenarios you built in there really involve the students and have them reflecting and thinking on their learning and how they're involved with it. So many great tips in there. Thank you for sharing. I really like the fact that you talked about building rubrics together, and sometimes, it's the conversation that goes along with it, and it might not be perfect. You might have done it 50 times and it's worked well, and the next time it's like something did not connect. So just keep trying and involving the kids. I think some really great messages. So thanks, Leanne.
So the last piece of thinking about how to involve your students in their learning is letting them know how to succeed and letting them practice. And part of that, quite frankly, is just letting them fail. So they first and foremost need to understand what they're actually trying to accomplish. Do they know what outcome they're working on? They should be able to voice that and explain that to somebody if they were to walk into the room and say, what are you doing? They should have a great understanding of what their actual goal is. We want the kids to be able to seek clarity and help when they need it. So they have to understand, am I getting this, or do I need help? And then having the confidence to ask for the help if they need it, or also having the confidence to say, I have this, I'm ready to move on. So we want to teach them how to reflect and monitor their progress along the way, and how to seek and actually, again, use that feedback. So we had earlier mentioned portfolios, and this is important just to keep in mind. You want to tell the whole story. If we're just looking at grades and levels, we're really only looking at the quantitative data if we're reporting and highlighting only that. But we want to show and highlight the journey that the students use to get to that quantitative data, and what are the things that they did. So these are just a few tools that you can use to do that. OneNote is a great tool that I know a lot of you have been using to have your portfolios in, but there's also Google and different websites like Weebly and Seesaw. And then sometimes it's really just nice to have a paper one too that the students can show off. So it's kind of a combination of what works best for you and your kids. And then just considering that transfer of responsibility, portfolios can be a bit tricky for kids. They're not always sure what their best work is. So in the fall, if you do a lot of modeling and you demonstrate to the students maybe how they would put this in their portfolio or what that might look like, and then move into that we do in the winter where you're actually guiding them and using their work as examples. And maybe, and we saw Shauna was talking earlier about the older kids helping the younger students. It's such a good way to get that, to move into that we do so that they're ready for the I do. When they move into the end of the year, then they can have enough information to feel confident about selecting their work for their portfolio and explaining it. So just that as a consideration. And just a quick reminder that we do have all of the things we talked about today. And I think there were a few things that Kent's going to add in with his grit that he was talking about as well. And those will be all available for you here in the resource bank. So just keep in mind this stuff is here, and you'll also be able to find today's recording once we have it up in here in with the other 3 sessions. It'll all be together in one for you.
Okay, so we kind of went over today, and we actually had a scavenger hunt. Melissa, if you want to go back one slide. We were going to do this with you, a great little way for us to go do a fun activity in relation to all of the work we've done in our 4-part web series on assessment feedback. This is a great idea to do with your students as well. So we were going to have you use some, go and do a scavenger hunt and share out what you found. But we have run out of time for today. So with that, we'll move into, are there any questions, comments, tips, or tricks that you would like to share with us before we finish off for today and our series? All right, so not seeing anything in the chat or anyone taking the mic, I would like to thank my colleagues Melissa and Vanessa for having built out the web series in collaboration with myself. I'd like to thank all of the teachers that provided tips throughout each of the series. And thanks to all of our attendees. We hope that these sessions have been informative and that you have found some tips and tricks that you might use in your own teaching. So with that, thank you very much and hope you have a great rest of your day.